Hi everybody, welcome back. That's one of the excellent things about sharing a workspace, which is you get yourself all settled in what is definitely the kingpin meeting room environment, and then the boss comes and says, off you go, I'm kicking you out. So I'm back. I've kicked him back out himself. I've sent him back upstairs. I'm Liz, and this is a session where things are going to get real. We're going to talk about the reality of I guess what we used to call office life. I don't know that we do call it that now. But the truth is we work with lots of organisations at Tortoise and do with them think-ins with their sort of internal communications teams, and quite often across the whole sort of breadth of employee bases, big global companies. And we are working with lots of companies who are trying to figure out how this is going to work now, next month, in 3 months, and in a year's time. So we've had some interesting and stimulating ideas this morning about metrics, about productivity, about culture, about community, about human connection, all designed to do sort of quite grand plans about reframing how work could be and how we want it to be. But there's a near-term issue, which is lots and lots of people, not everybody, because of course some jobs you absolutely can't do unless you're in a place, try being a nurse and working from home kind of thing. But lots and lots of us have left the workplace that we used to know behind, worked separately and remotely. And now we're just starting to sort of creep our way back into a rhythm, a working rhythm of some kind. And it's not easy, is the truth. So this session is perhaps a slightly near-term horizon kind of session to start thinking about the practicalities of what's going to happen next. And, maybe a sort of a 5 to 10 year horizon. And we're joined by John Drummond, we've heard from already a couple of times, by Enrico Sanna, who is the co-founder of FORA, which is, I'm sitting in a FORA now. It's our lovely home for Tortoise, our newsroom. There's a number of shared, interesting workspaces across London and the UK. And Julia Hobsbawm, who is, amongst many other things, chair of the Work Shift Commission at Demos. And I'm going to start with Julia, if I may, because she has written a paper recently called The Nowhere Office. There might be a slight clue in the title there, Julia, about where your head is at with thinking through what sort of workplace almost is going to feel like soon. And you talk in the paper about a new social contract for work. Could you just sort of briefly explain what the thrust of it is? What are you asking for?
Yes, hello, thanks for having me. I love the think-ins. I think this is very timely, as has been alluded to, and as my work is called The Nowhere Office. We are twixt and between a place of certainty. We are literally nowhere from where we were, which was the idea of a permanent fixed place, skyscraper, 9 to 5 world order, to where we will probably end up. My own horizon scanning is looking probably no further than 2030, by which time it is expected that we will have the first AI board member in situ, by which time quantum physics will mean that most of us are able to conduct anything we want remotely and as a hologram and so on and so forth. And I don't think we can predict further than that. What I think the Nowhere Office is an opportunity for a reset. I think if you take away the pandemic, which catapulted us into fully remote, made all the technology possible, the technology made it all possible to exist and to work in a crisis way. What it actually did was accelerated lots of trends that have been happening for the last 50 years, then the last 30 years, and then even the last 5 years, in which Enrico's business of co-working also became center stage. And so now what we've got is a settling down. We have a couple of tensions. One is there's really interesting inconsistency in the data. So young people, for example, both want to work from offices and have groovy workplaces, but they also want complete flexibility and freedom to work whenever, to have flexibility. Flexibility and mobility is a sort of prized asset. McKinsey and all the data crunchers are showing around about 20% of time is likely to be spent working remotely at the bare minimum across the office environment, which has got massive implications for the property portfolio, for the future of cities, and so on and so forth. And running along this is a thread which is in a way the most interesting issue, is that what this has thrown up is, what does work mean to us? We're in the middle of culture wars, we're in the middle of generation wars, we're in the middle of an identity crisis in culture, which is coming directly into the workplace. Who am I when I work? What is my life when I'm not at work? What is my life like in between work? And I suppose the final bit of data I'd throw out there, just to show how in between and nowhere this status is the question about productivity and work. So there's a really interesting piece by the Friedman Institute. It's not called the Friedman Institute, it's called the Friedman, yes, it is called the Friedman Institute with UC Chicago, de facto showing that all the extra work that we're doing from home is probably actually a 20% net productivity drop, even though we think we're more productive because we have digital presenteeism. And so that begs the whole question about all the invisible, loose, apparently wasted time when in fact work is done. And that is echoed by the Microsoft Trends Index this year, which said that the number 3 risk to all of this hybrid is really burnout, is exhaustion. So my final point is, yes, we're going to need the office. We're going to need to refurbish and recast the office, which will be good for places like FORA, but it might also be good for coffee shops and it might also be good for hotels. Yes, we are going to need to go back to the office, but it's going to be really complicated because, for instance, if you go into a meeting, the chances are going to be that 1 in 5 people in those meetings will say they want to join by Teams or Zoom, which means where you meet and how you meet is not the same as when you met before, and so on and so forth. And yet in the middle of all of this is actually a rather fantastic, unique moment for change, and the world of work suffering endemic low productivity, suffering epidemic stress, needed it. So I'm a kind of optimistic pragmatist, tinged with pessimism, but I say onwards.
Thanks so much, Julia. I'm going to come to Enrico in a second, but I do just want to, while I'm talking to you, Julia, to pick up on a couple of threads that were in the previous session and in the productivity one we've had before that this morning. You mentioned productivity just now and a sort of net loss and presenteeism and all of that. I think we can all grasp that notion, but you also talk in the paper about a sort of shift in the metrics of what constitutes good work. And we've just come from a conversation about metrics in the previous session. So I'm really interested to know, when you think about measurement of work, I suppose effectiveness or something, what are the metrics that you would be pointing to? What are the new and different ones from where we've been before?
Well, I certainly think that the P word and productivity is the key word. I think we should talk about it. I think there's quite a lot of pointless argument about productivity. Productivity has been seen as dry and dull and demeaning and, you know, returning to the Taylorism of the 19th century. And productivity for me is engagement, creativity, something making sense, something being doable, something being measurable, something working for everyone. And part of the problem is that the management systems, the leadership systems that we've accumulated are, not to put too fine a point in it, not really fit for purpose. So with the greatest respect to the many, many, many fine people in human resources, they are trapped in a dying system, which does not help the people who work for companies. It doesn't really help them. I'm generalizing wildly, but most people agree. HR is in crisis, leadership, management. How do you have good productivity measurement if you don't really have that alignment. The other final observation about productivity is that it probably needs to revolve very much around timeline and deadline. You know, we have structures and systems based around timelines and deadlines like quarterly reports or 5-year election cycles, which also aren't fit for purpose. So it's not sort of people's inadequacy, it's systemic difficulty. But ultimately, productivity is simple. You're engaged, it matters. You work with good people rate you, you're going to be productive.
Mm. Thanks so much, Julia. And it's a great segue into talking to Enrico, I think. Enrico, I didn't sleep very well last night. I woke up early this morning. I felt a bit sluggish. I was a bit nervous about today, but I was so delighted to be getting on the tube, get some big tunes on, coming in my ears and feeling, by the time I got to FORA, I said a jolly hello to the brilliant woman on reception who I like so much. I felt great by the time I got here. And as your business running, you know, a number, it's quite a lot of FORA, or is the plural of FORA, 4I maybe, FORAs around London. You must talk all the time to the people who are residents in your spaces about what they are wanting and what their people are saying about how it feels to get back to something outside of your house.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I always find these debates fascinating, and you know how much I love thinkings and tortoise. So thank you for the opportunity. Let me caveat, because I've done a few of these. And so let me caveat, because obviously I'm a huge fan of offices. But I'm a huge fan of fit for purpose, great offices. And there is the whole reason why we and my co-founder started FORA 5 years ago. We thought that the office was broken. But unfortunately, that's still what the office is. So when we think about offices, it is a category that definitely needs to reinvent it. And we've been trying to push that way. And I think, as it was said earlier, the pandemic has only showed some of the shortfalls of offices and only accelerated some of the trends. So I'm going to try to be careful here that when I talk offices, perhaps I'm not talking more in line with what we experience every day at FORA or with our clients. And the particular, you know, we have a particularly narrow view because the clients who come to FORA think about the office as a strategic element of their mission and think about their office as a tailored solution for their needs. But unfortunately, as I said earlier, that's not the office. The office has been a cookie cutter product that's been around for 100 years, where it's basically we're chaining people to a desk. That's what it's been. And people say, well, open plan, a few meeting rooms, here we go, I have an office, right? And it's going to work for everybody, no matter what you do. And that is quite the opposite of what we think. So my two major points, one is the office has a real role to play here to bring people back, but it needs to be fit for purpose. And it cannot be one size fits all. You really need to understand what is the role of the office you want in your company. And so that varies depending whether you're a media company, you're a lawyer, so, you know, everybody has and then the individuals within that company have different needs, and you need to tailor these to their needs. And so I do think although I'm a fan of offices, I'm not advocating at all that things need to return to pre-COVID. I actually think we should embrace these COVID changes. We should really listen to employees and see what they want out of the office. But I'm a huge fan and a huge believer that the office has a major role to play, because no matter the technology we've been looking at, and we look at technology, we look at what 5 years from now can come on and everything else. The office, the physical presence, bringing people together, and that connectivity can be replicated. It's unique. You know, people call it the water cooler moment, they call it, you know, serendipity, whatever you want to define it. And I personally, you know, we've been back since forever. I mean, we've only really had 2 lockdowns as a company, right?
Yeah.
But the stuff I'm getting out of my team as Enrico, the CEO, with my employees, right? The stuff I get out of them on a physical, you know, presence when we're all in the same room, we're not going to be able to replicate remotely. Having said that, I agree with the point that was made earlier, is there will be people on screen. So technology plays an important role so that the people on the screen feel they're in the room and they don't feel like second-class citizens. You know, so, but again, the office can do that. there is a way to do that. There is a way to have a hybrid work environment. So I think fit for purposes, tailored offices are definitely the way to go forward.
Brilliant. Thanks, Enrico. Julia, you wanted to come back in on that, I think.
Yes, I think that Enrico is right, but I also think that what has happened is that the pandemic has forced a focus on why we're working and when we're working and what our project is. And yes, people do need to be together. The difficulty is going to be breaking that cookie cutter model for two reasons. One is that the global property industry is worthy of a tortoise analysis. Let me just say that. The stuff I'm coming across is pretty incredible. And it's almost certain that cities, centres are going to need some sort of bailout because the reduction in corporate real estate revenues is going to be pretty undeniable and pretty difficult to beat. But what actually matters, I think, is not a binary of fabulous tailored office space or great hybrid. It's what the point of the business and the organization is, and the leadership and the matching with this now highly individualized, customized, personalized, nano identity world of work. And that's a challenge. So yeah.
Can I make
I'm going to come to John Drummond in a second. John, you're the chair of a consultancy that works with lots of big organisations trying to figure this stuff out, frankly, around workspace and culture and leadership and all of this. And actually, we're quite an interesting example, strangely, at Tortoise. I'm not saying we're perfect. We've not got it 100% right. But of course, our place where we come to work, our newsroom, our office, if you like, is also meant to be the home for Tortoise members too. You know, when the world is normal, members come into the newsroom physically. They come in, they sit on the sofa, they have a glass of wine with us, they join in the meetings. So we have that community, family feeling sort of baked into the design of the space, literally the design of the space. We think about it in terms of the microphones that dangle down from the ceiling for when we're having an event. All of this is sort of thought through and designed in. But John, you know, if we think about designing a workplace, you know, for those people that need to have a place to come together, however often that is, and for whatever reason, you're not really meant to start with, you know, where the desks and the sofas and the pot plants go. You're meant to start with the design of the organization itself, aren't you? Are you there?
And can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you're a fabulous example, by the way, at Tortoise, because you're doing a lot of the things that I outline in our most recent report, the Human Organization, that really break the mold. You are open and engaging. You give power to the edge, I think. The idea that somehow employees are separate from your customers is increasingly, I think, a wacky notion that you break that mold and you give people power by giving them a voice. But I agree with Jill. I think we're going through the biggest shake-up in the world of work for over 100 years. But I think it'll take 10 years or more to work its way through, and that's okay. I think just to build on what Julia was saying about the nowhere office and what Enrico was saying, I think there are 4 places now. There's work from home with its own challenges of how do organizations that are building new homes design in home offices. So I think there'll be a big ripple effect there. There's work from the office and the big challenges that you've explored there, and I'm sure we'll talk further about in a minute. There's work near home. And Julia mentions spaces like what the kind of spaces Enrico provides or are available in hotels. I think it'll be a lot wider than that. I think there's a great opportunity for local authorities in reinventing libraries. I think a lot of organizations that have a presence in the high street will diversify. So some of the banks, for example, as they will have mixed branches that include their own staff but open up for other local professionals to use their offices. So I think the work near home environment is exciting. And I think there's the work from anywhere environment, which is massive as well. I mean, only a proportion of people work from the office. A huge number are actually, they need to work from anywhere. So we need to build those kind of thinkings in. But the big thing for me is not the physical office, but what kind of behaviors we adopt in the office. And I kind of went down a rabbit hole over the last year and identified, I think, that there are 5 key behaviors. One is concentration, and concentration has been the default for the office environment. You come in, you open your laptop and you concentrate, you work on your own stuff. It's clear that now from working from home, if all you're going to do is concentrate, no need to come in. I think the default for the office now becomes social. And there are 3 social behaviors that are important for life at work in the office. One is conversation, one is collaboration and innovation, and a third is exploration. We need to think of ideas as being contagious, and how do we create office environments where you're allowing ideas to free flow? How do we learn from the principles of how viruses spread and apply that to how ideas can spread? Mm-hmm. And there's one final one, which is reflection. That, as many of us have said, if you're on 9 to 5 or later on Zoom, you've got no time to reflect. And yet the default for the brain is reflection. It's how you begin to make sense of all the variety of inputs that you acquire over the course of a working day. So we need to build in reflection as well. It's productive. Reflection is productive. So I think you let behaviors dictate the spaces, not the spaces. The people come first, spaces second, not vice versa.
Thanks so much, John. There are a couple of people making what I think are very important points in the chat that we'll come to in a sec. Perhaps Isabel Peterson would be good to hear from, maybe Lorraine Hegarty if you're there, and Mark Wilson. But just before we come to those people as the team bring them through, Julia, we hear a lot, one of the sort of resistance to long-term, everybody remote, we're in cafes, we're at home, we're doing our own thing. One of the key refrains is this thing that if people need to collaborate, if they need to come together and be creative and do things as a team, they have to be physically together. You're not so sure about that.
Well, other than taking sort of HR and leadership structures in my sights for dismantling, there's a couple of other myths that I certainly think we need to challenge, even though we don't have to debunk them completely. So collaboration and conversation and social, what I call social health, which is the connection that happens between people in a technology era, is obviously critical. But there's a certain amount of collaboration Kool-Aid that's also being drunk, which is yada, 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 we're all collaborating, we're all yakking, we're all great. And actually, it's more osmotic than that. It's more about what you pick up in silent social cues. You watch, you learn, you notice the body language. You're present in a way that means you're therefore not excluded. The whole exclusion issue is going to be really critical when people start negotiating hybrid contracts and so on. And the other thing, with apologies to Enrico, because I mean, I love the workspace, environment, but I don't think gorgeous workplaces make gorgeous work. I mean, MIT famously produced some of the most extraordinary work in the history of technology from a corrugated iron shed. So actually, we need to be sure that we're not creating lifestyle environments that mirror social values and generational trends to attract talent in order to build brands and grow businesses, and rename them and redress them as absolutely essential to doing good work. That said, it is also undeniably clear that when you look at catastrophic failures, particularly in the public sector, they quite often take place in horrendous physical working environments devoid of anything beautiful. So I'm not trying to say there's no point in having gorgeous offices, but they're not the only point.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Julia. Let's go to Mark Wilson, who I think asked an important question in the chat. I'm kind of interested in a small way about the evolving etiquette of the new way of working. But your question is precise, but I think it's totemic in its implication, really, about inclusion that Julia's talking about.
Yeah, and I need to give some credit to Matt Ballantyne, who I think some of you know.
Yes, I know Matt well, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, Matt and I have had many conversations around this, and some of this thinking is out of that. But we've always had this thing, even back in the days before video conferencing was widespread, where you would have, you know, perhaps a conference spider phone in the middle of the desk, and you've got 5 people around a table and 1 person on the end of the call. Yeah. And then you go around and you do AOB at the end, and you forget the person who's been sitting
in the phone
for the whole meeting. Yeah, and we're just doing the same thing now with hybrid work, with better quality communications, but we're in danger of having of not resolving the cultural issue, where you have a group of people sitting around the table and a group of people on the end of some sort of remote link in another office or at home or wherever. It doesn't really matter, and they might want to be engaged in that meeting, but the humans in the room will see the humans around them and naturally interact with the humans around them. And so we need to come up with some kind of, I'm not even sure that it's a set of cultural rules, but that's a hurdle that we have to get over in the world of hybrid work. And I think my question was really to Enrico when he was talking about hybrid work and how, you know, being able to use FORA, you know, as a place, and that it does work across boundaries. You know, was there anything that you're getting that's coming out of your team that talks about how we might address that cultural challenge?
What do you think, Enrico?
Well, it's definitely not just at FORA, but through our clients and the conversation with our clients. The point you're raising are completely fair, and so I can provide a room that technology-wise gives you everything you need, but I can't. But the culture of how you conduct yourself, and it's really changes from company to company, and that is where I'm afraid this might go incredibly wrong for all the thoughts that we've been sharing for the past 20 minutes. Where I think we might be back in the office is because of these 2 things. Because one is, cultures really matter in the workplace, in my view. And for all the talks about remote is great and everything, when I talk to a lot of prospective clients, at the end, it feels that this could also be a cost-saving exercise, a massive cost-saving exercise. And so we send everybody home, or we create these very small offices for everybody that come together, but then we ignore completely how we manage a remote workforce. And so we have a hybrid meeting, but the people on the phone don't get really consulted. They're not really in the room. And so my biggest thing is, it is about culture. It's about not so much leadership. A lot of people talk about this leadership thing. It's about management. We have really not a good track record pre-COVID of producing a lot of good managers when everybody was in the same office. Now you're telling me people are going to be somewhere else, and we're going to all of a sudden have great managers. I mean, I doubt it. And so to me, we don't really have the training or the tools yet to figure out to do this properly. So I hope John is right. I hope it takes us 10 years to get there, because we need a bit of time to build up that. So I'm really, really worried about, you know, all these talks and all these shortcuts that people might take, because it will result in just poor work environments for everybody, whether at home or in a physical space in an office.
Enrico, thanks so much. I know Julia is keen to come in on leadership, but while we're in this sort of mode of tiered degrees of access, if I can call it that, I feel very anxious about the rapid embracing and making available more flexible options of hybrid working, and the potential impact that could have on different constituencies in the workforce. And it's a point that Lorraine Hegarty was making, and I think it's worth us just sort of touching on it. Now, are you there, Lorraine?
Yeah.
Hello, nice to see you.
Hi. Yeah, I just worry in some ways that it will disadvantage women in particular. I mean, I think women have suffered a lot during COVID, working at home. Often they're the ones doing homeschooling as well as holding down quite high-powered jobs and trying to juggle everything. I've been at board meetings where the men have almost proudly said they haven't got involved at all in homeschooling. And I'm like, well, does your wife work? Oh, yeah, she works. So you're letting her carry the load, and you're prepared to sit there and tell me and other people that you haven't taken part in that. And there's also been research. I remember being at an event with Sally Davis when she was chief medical officer.
Yeah.
So that women who work part-time don't progress in their careers as quickly or often as far as women who work full-time. And I don't think it's only women who will be disadvantaged, but it's just that because of the demands made of them, they are more likely to embrace it and want to embrace it and see it as a positive. So how do you ensure that people do still get the progression? And I think in the end, you've probably got to have certain rules around it. Like you've got to be in the office on certain days, because otherwise you won't be able to get any kind of parity. I also think, for young people, the whole learning by osmosis point that Julia made is so important. And, I know a lot of young people who've started their first jobs during the past year and who still haven't met anybody from their team, physically met anybody from their team. And, it's a really big deal to ask somebody if you've got to book a call. And it's not a very big deal to ask them if you're just walking by their desk or you bump into them waiting by the lift or whatever it might be. And so that learning and progression and creating the networks that you need in order to progress, and people being able to visibly see your work. So I think, and I also agree with Enrico, I'm violently agreeing with everybody here, that it's going to take time for us to develop the skills, to have the right leadership qualities, to get the right communication in place. I talk quite a lot on these kind of things, and people always, the one thing that a lot of leaders fall down on, I would say, is communication. And it's been easy to fall down on it during the last year because there've been so many other things to concentrate on. Everybody's been in, almost crisis management mode from the get-go and having to adapt. So I suppose those are, in general, that's a summation of my points.
Thank you, Lorraine. I'll come to Julia, I guess, just to round off this point, because it is something that I worry about, that in the near term, I'm talking about the next 12 months, 2 years, if a more remote way of working is made available to everyone, I genuinely fear that we will have another shared parental leave situation on our hands, which is the women will say yes, the men will say no, and the next thing you know we've got another two-tier workforce. What do you think are the sort of ways to mitigate against that?
Well, firstly, we may end up with more lockdowns because the pandemic is global, and so it's going around the world. Secondly, to Enrico's point about cost saving, the technology companies and the venture capital companies, they are licking their lips to go to fully remote models of work as both cost savings and as testing new. Zoom has invested in hybrid headgear and goodness knows what. So there is a push to fully remote, just as there is a push back to the office and presenteeism. The reality is that lots of people will be disadvantaged by hybrid and lots of people will be advantaged by hybrid. But in the middle of this conversation has got to come a reality check, which is not all jobs can be flexible and part-time. So for example, my GP is the most fabulous in-demand woman. She's not available because she's so fabulous and in demand that she's negotiated the most incredible settlement of constant sabbaticals and time off. You have to queue like the Harrods sale to get in a phone call to book her a month ahead. You know what? I'd like her to be paid more to be fully present. I don't want every job to have the opportunity to be flexible, but I'd like jobs where you have to be present, where you don't have flexibility, be better paid. And I'd like to have a conversation about that, which is why we've all got it wrong, haven't we? And the frontline workers aren't paid as much as those of us that live and work in gorgeous offices.
Yeah.
The other point about standardization is very key. Ultimately, if you have too much iteration, no gravity and boundary, everyone is going to get very confused and everybody's going to get disadvantaged. And ultimately, I think there are three groups that we can give bucket names to, that we have to factor into this conversation about when they work, where they work, given that, let's be clear, half the world's workforce works, but the majority of the world's workforce doesn't actually work in offices, right? We are still the majority of people that take up the oxygen about the future of work, but an awful lot of work happens in the economy that isn't done out of offices or between offices. But those three groups of people are, I call, learners, those coming into the workplace, the beginnings of their careers. They need new skills, they need to pick up this osmotic. Leavers, those people that are older, that have got not only the desire for work-life balance, but much more work-life balance demands like childcare, caring, duties, might be going freelance, might be going contract. And then leaders, I agree, sorry, that's my phone, that's working from home situation, I picked that up. I agree with Enrico. You can find people that hate the term leadership and you can find the term people that hate managers, but I'm going for alliteration, so I call them leaders. But it's the people who make the decisions, it's people who set strategy, people who have the choice to impose on the rest of us how we work.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Julia. I think I'd like to bring in just one more contribution from the floor because we've only got 5 minutes to go, and I can see the conversation about the role of people or HR sort of hotting up a bit in the chat. I wonder if we could go to, let's just see, perhaps Glenn Seabright, if you're there, or there was a comment made by Sian Harrington, if you're there, Sian. You were talking about your experiences working with HR directors from all remote companies and how they're wiring things up, not to adapt one way, but the other way, if that makes sense. Are you there, Sian?
Yeah, hi.
Hiya.
Hi. Yeah, no, I'm a journalist who writes about HR and the future of work. So I've been interviewing people who are in, have always been set up as all remote workplaces to see what it is about what they do that's different to the traditional way that we work. And the feedback I've got from quite a lot of different companies from their HR departments is that even if you're hybriding, you need to set up as if you're remote first. Because that's the only way that you can really ensure that you are intentional about issues like inclusion. You start by assuming that if somebody isn't in the room, it allows for asynchronous working, for example. So people don't all have to be in the place at the same time. So you set your systems up in order to enable people to be able to say, come into a recorded meeting later in the day across different time zones. You try and stop too much work being done through meetings like this, and instead you have to help people to understand how to communicate more clearly through, be it email if you choose that, or through Slack or things like that. But they're all saying that it's really probably not going to work if you go to the sort of system people are talking about here, where you have some people ringing in, some people on a video conference, some people in a room. Their sort of experience is that doesn't make for the best working environment. So that's just a comment from me, really, that's the sort of feedback that I'm getting from people.
Thank you, Sian. I'm going to come back to John, perhaps for just a couple of closing thoughts. John, you're just mentioning here that the word hybrid itself is rather cold, it's rather clinical, and actually the sort of way the grand ambitions for a reset of the world of work has become chitted down to now it's just a case of who comes in on a Wednesday kind of thing. You want to get rid of the word hybrid altogether and reframe the whole conversation.
Yeah, I think framing is really important. And I'm always deeply disappointed when ever you get to a liminal transformational point like this, new words or concepts invented by academics seem to take prominence over pragmatic things. Basically, this is about reinventing organizations as human organizations and designing our humanity in a way that for the last 100 years it's been designed out. Here's a few basic pointers. In March, Harvard University said that only 2% of conversations end when both parties want them to. That is a phenomenal statistic, as conversation is the core unit of an organization. We don't design in sound. We think Organizations need to think about all the senses. When we think of branding, we think of vision and visual branding. Branding is all the senses. We need to design them in. Humor. 4-year-olds laugh 300 times a day, but at the age of 23, as you're kicking off your career, laughter dives through the floor. We need to bring laughter back into the workplace. Humans have a 15-year period of youth in order to play and make sense of our world, but we've designed play out to the workplace. Humans are social as well as they are individual, and somehow we've designed out the social part of our nature through focusing on individual roles and responsibilities and annual reviews and all of that kind of stuff. Let's design back in the social. I got dozens of other examples, but let's just reinvent our organizations as being fully human, and we'll discover they hit and achieve organizational purpose and goals and improve productivity, all of the things you want an organization to fulfill if we just allow ourselves to be fully human.
Thanks so much, John, and to everybody for contributing both on screen and, of course, to our amazing panel, to John, to Julia, and to Enrico. I've made a number of notes, and they're not quite what I was expecting, actually, to think about and reflect on. As I say, I work with organisations who are trying to figure this stuff out all the time. I know that we will come back to, as we think through the output of the summit, this question of productivity. And I was really interested in Julia's sort of plea, productivity is not a dirty word, and a way to understand what productivity is without changing it, without measuring something different, but to think of it as something that is, progressive, productive, helpful, rather than a sort of negative, mercenary, sausage factory kind of a word. I think that is helpful and useful. I can't help but feel that we're going to have to return to the question of human resources, the function of it, the way the department operates, its roles, responsibilities, its remits, its kind of beliefs and value structures in the context of an organization design. It seems to me that lots of people have touched on that, both positive and negative, and it feels like that could be a fulcrum for us journalistically, perhaps, to investigate this out a little bit more, this sort of future shaping of the working environment. I also really was intrigued by this idea that collaboration doesn't have to look like lots of people standing together around a whiteboard with post-it notes, brainstorming, that the way that people come together, the reason why they want to be physically together in the same space, can be quieter and more subtle than that. They are the sort of non-verbal cues, the silences, the looks on people's faces. I think that's an important aspect of the humanity that we're talking about. And then finally, I think it's worth thinking, really thinking through this question of how do we make sure that the next phase, the phase where we know it's going to be difficult, we're going to make missteps, we're going to design it in a sort of awkward fashion, it will take time to settle down. How do we make sure that we don't lose ground in terms of access and inclusion and opportunity for those groups of people who perhaps have struggled in the past and we're just starting to make some headway? So there's lots to think about. I want to say a big thank you to everybody for weighing in. We're just going to take a bit of a pause. We're going to invite Bhavisha back to do some more breathing, a bit of yoga. If you're into that, please do hang around. We're going to take a little break. If you want to go and put the kettle on, grab yourself a sandwich, have a strong coffee, have a juice. Probably don't have a gin. It's a bit early in the day for that. But thank you so much to our panel, and we will return with the next session after we've had a short peace, focus, Zen-like break.